Hello friends, welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today I will be discussing Ernst Gombrich's A Little History of the World. This is quite a famous book and one that I've had for a long time. I don't even remember when I bought it, but I have read it. This is probably my fourth or fifth time reading it over the years, and every time I come back to it, I'm still consistently surprised. And yeah, I mean, you could classify this as nonfiction, but I don't think almost any other book that I can think of does a better job of showing how history really is a story. Like, yeah, history is based on true events, of course, but the way we construct it, the way we frame it, is obviously, two different versions of the same story, just like in fiction, can be wildly different. And not only be different in themselves as the story, but influence the world in different ways. The same story told in different ways. So that is one of the reasons why I think this is so fascinating. To get into the details, I mean, the caveat, of course, is this a replacement for learning the details of different historical periods and times and places? Absolutely not. But it really is one of the best looks into almost, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say the philosophy of history, but like how we, one of the best ways to think about how we view history and how history is kind of framed and told. So I think I kind of already said that, but the great thing about it is also just the way it's told for all ages. I mean, this is a book that I feel I would give to my child if I had one. It's a book I would give as a gift to another young person. It is a book that I have enjoyed reading multiple times as an adult. It's really, truly a book for all ages. And the author, of course, was born in Vienna, Austria. I don't think I said that, so that's why I'm counting it for Austria. And the frame of the story, and the author even kind of admits this indirectly multiple times, it does come from a European perspective, though there are kind of a few smaller chapters dedicated to China and India, and a very small one, dedicated to the pre-Hispanic cultures of the Americas. It's very, very much based in European and Western perspective of the world. And he quite admits that in multiple parts of the book. So, here's a great example just from the first chapter. And keep in mind when this was written too, the first edition came out in the 1930s, and then he added an extra chapter after World War II later on in his life, and that's included in this edition. Also, more and more preface, because there's so many things I want to talk about with this book. Philip Pullman, who was a very influential author on me as a young person, brilliant, irresistible, a wonderful surprise. I think that's actually the reason why I bought it, and it was a long time ago. It might have been when I was still in high school or secondary school if you're across the pond. So yeah, Philip Pullman, obviously, for a long time I really looked up to him as an author. I mean, I definitely have my criticisms now of sort of some of his perspectives and thoughts as an adult, but I have to appreciate the influence and the impact that he had on my life with his Dark Materials, and then reading an interview with him about his admiration for the works of Tove Jansson, which became some of my favorite books. And the first one that I did for this project, so I have to mention him and his influence on me. It's certainly been somebody who changed my life as a reader. So with that out of the way, now I can actually start on A Little History of the World. In the first chapter, I'm going to read this section. Describing history. It's like a bottomless well. Does all this looking down make you dizzy? It does me. So let's light a scrap of paper and drop it down into that well. It will fall slowly, deeper and deeper, and as it burns, it will light up the sides of the well. Can you see it? It's going down and down. Now it's so far down, it's like a tiny star in the dark depths. It's getting smaller and smaller, and now it's gone. Our memory is like that burning scrap of paper. We use it to light up the past. First of all, our own, and then we ask old people to tell us what they remember. After that, we look for letters written by people who are already dead. And in this way, we light our way back. And that's that image of what the experience of learning about history is actually like has always stayed with me. It's a deep, the past is just this deep, dark abyss, and we really only have fragments of it. And that little scrap of paper that's lit dropping down, it illuminates these little fragments. And now imagine that little scrap of paper actually takes a ton of work, which it does. The research of history is an incredible amount of work. Just like Richard Feynman says, he knows how hard it is to actually know anything in this world. So it's the same with physics. It's the same with history. It's so incredibly difficult to really say you know anything. And this book always keeps that in perspective, and the simplicity of it, it's like that's sometimes why we get lost in the weeds of deep philosophy or deep history. It does help us sometimes to take a step back and look at the big picture. And that big picture is kind of what, the whole idea of my channel is dedicated to. But I am willing to admit that I do often miss small details, and obviously can only cover so much in a 10 to 30 minute video. So with that being said, this book goes through not just the history of the events that happened, but like the invention of writing and kind of almost over explaining, the way you would to a child, but things that you really don't even think about. Like, why were, for example, Chinese hieroglyphs so useful for a whole number of languages being able to understand the same script? Because they're symbols, you can say that word in any language. But then, of course, there are huge advantages to the, Arabic script that eventually is adopted, or the 26 letters or whatever, and that's obviously very useful for being able to learn easily and teach easily a language, more so than the Chinese. So it's like he approaches these different perspectives and shows like how these things from different cultures and different ideas that have developed over the world. Time itself, the invention of time itself, is kind of this really wondrous thing. Like this book really turns just the most basic things that we take for granted and makes us understand that in history, in the past, these weren't always things that people could take for granted, and they were like literally inventions. So let's see, let me scroll through here. Scroll using digital language about books. That's the world we live in. So well, scroll is actually like a papyrus, isn't it? So no, I'm okay. As we go through here, Confucius has talked about, there's a bit of Chinese in Indian history in here. But yeah, it's usually kind of talked about from the perspective of the West. Oh, the Enemy of History chapter. That was a great one, about the Emperor Shi Huang Ti, or the Prince of Qin, who China might even be named after, he says, being such an influential emperor in China, but also like trying to destroy and burn a lot of the works. That's one of my favorite chapters. He opens it by saying, if you've always found history boring, you are going to enjoy this chapter, because it's about an emperor who tried to burn the entire history of an empire. So, but it ends, of course, saying it's a very bad idea to prevent people from knowing their own history, because if you want to do anything new, you must first make sure you know what people have tried before. It gets quite a bit deeper than that, but I don't know. Sometimes the simple things are nice. So let's see, where the book to me really, really gets interesting is actually in the later chapters. It's quite easy to read for the first half, but then the later chapters I found myself you got to slow down and kind of put into perspective, oh, what do I know about this? And it frames things in different ways. A new age, we hit the Renaissance, and he says, how nice it would be if suddenly heralds were to ride through the streets crying, attention please, a new age is beginning. But things aren't like that. People change their opinions without even noticing. And then all of a sudden you become aware of it, as you do when you look at your old school books. Then they announce with pride, we are the new age. And they often add, people used to be so stupid. Oh man, that hits home. That hits home, doesn't it? Because we're all so brilliant. Yeah, and then let's keep going. The Enlightenment stuff was really interesting. The Age of Enlightenment. When we're talking about here, it's really interesting because before the Age of Enlightenment, there's a whole 2 pages, and this was really striking. But there's this whole 2 pages talking about how Louis XIV, he would appear in just this royal garb, and there would be this whole ceremony about saying how he's the most beautiful person they've ever seen, and it was all this pomp and ceremony that is compared to kind of like how Montezuma was treated in the Americas, I think it was, or the Chinese emperors it was how they treated the Egyptian pharaoh. He was the God-given sun itself, le roi soleil, the sun king, on whose warmth and light all life depended. Just like the pharaoh, you might think, for he had been called the son of the sun. But there was one big difference. The ancient Egyptians really believed it, while for Louis XIV it was only a sort of game which he and everyone present knew no more than a ceremonious, well-rehearsed and magnificent performance. Brilliant. It's it almost ties in this sort of idea of these old traditions of extending into modern times and how they sort of become irrelevant but they are still practiced. So things become irrelevant not when people realize they're irrelevant, but when their sort of irony of their being practiced takes its full course, and very often the innocent irony of it and humor that I'm sure even people noticed in that time period ends in a terrible, violent bloodshed. This is not a lesson to be overlooked, in my opinion. We could have a whole discussion about irony, but that'll be another day. And ironic humor. Another connection to The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, by the way. But again, different video, different time. Another thing he said about the Age of Enlightenment that I really appreciated. Give me a second to find it here. Many people today think that the Enlightenment only taught what was obvious, talking about combating darkness and suspicion with the pure light of reason. Quote, many people today think that the Enlightenment only taught what was obvious, and that people in those days had a rather simple view of the great mysteries of nature and the world. This is true, but you must realize that what seems obvious to us wasn't in the least so then, and that it took a great deal of courage, self-sacrifice, and perseverance for people to keep on repeating them so that they seem obvious to us today. And of course, you must also realize that reason cannot and never will give us the key to all mysteries, although it has often put us on the right track. I don't know if I could have said that more beautifully, and I'm, kind of working on something right now where that fits in very nicely, so I'm sure that quote will come back. I just thought that was I actually think that's the most impressive, beautiful quote in this whole book. Like, simple and nuanced. And then we go through the French Revolution, of course, Napoleon, Men and Machines. We're getting close to the end here now, but in the chapter Men and Machines, Listen to this. This is talking about how, industrialization starts to take over and people lose a ton of jobs, right? Something that we could be very well facing with artificial intelligence. People began to despair. Why bother to learn a skill and take pains to make beautiful things by hand? Machines could do the same job 100 times more quickly, often more neatly, and at 100th of the price. And so weavers, blacksmiths, spinners, and cabinet makers sank ever more deeply into misery and destitution, running from factory to factory in the hope of earning a few pennies. Many of them raged against the machines that had robbed them of their happiness. Is that where the band name comes from? I'm just saying. They broke into factories and wrecked the looms, but it made no difference. In England in 1812, the death penalty was... Wait, hold on. In England in 1812, the death penalty was introduced for anyone found guilty of destroying a machine. And then newer and better machines followed that could do the work in not of 100, but of 500 workers, and the general misery increased. And then we get the rise of socialism, don't we? So this is quite a haunting chapter, and I'm not going to say more about it right now. I underlined that line. The death penalty was introduced for anyone found guilty of destroying a machine, and that was quite a haunting line that'll probably stick with me. So I don't want to say any more about that right now. Just saying I underlined it. So let's see. That pretty much covers it. We get into World War I. And the book when it was originally published ended at the end of World War I. And this additional chapter that Ernst Gombrich adds after many years have passed, he looks back on this chapter of World War I in a bit of shame because he talks about the unfairness of how Germany was treated, after World War I, which many people still point to as okay, but he actually is kind of apologetic about this because many people, this was the reason that many people blindly followed Hitler into World War II. And it's very interesting, this additional chapter that he added, because he admits the mistakes and the oversights in his original little history of the world. And whether you agree with them or not, I think it's the mark of a person to be able to look back at what they originally believed and say they were wrong. In fact, people who believe the exact same things that they believed when they were in their teens, I cannot trust them because, how could you? How could you? This life is insanely complicated, and as we learn more, how can you just have the same outlook that you had at 16 years of old? It's just it's an outrageous concept to me, but they are out there. They are out there, and anyway. So there was one more thing he said in the Age of Machines. He also does he does acknowledge that, with industrialization and so on, many people's lives did improve. The Industrial Revolution did improve many people's lives, but today we look at, and he's writing this, I don't know when, in the 80s or something, maybe this afterward chapter. He's observing that, if you look at many parts of the world, their lives really haven't improved that much. And you can probably say the same today, that industrialization has had minimal effects in improving people's lives in many countries. Maybe some are catching up now. I don't know. This is more speculation really for another day. But, I don't like to just give you guys straight up reviews and say this is what the book is about and that's it. I like to go deeper if I can. I like to take my good 20 minutes to talk about these books and the actual, what I found profound in it. And that's the point of reading, right? That's the point of reading. So I know anyone who's subscribing to this channel at this point appreciates that way of doing it. So thanks to all of you. And Yeah, that is all I have for a little history of the world. I do want to say that going forward here, what I'm thinking, we are getting to the halfway point of the number of the countries. I actually do have a numerical limit of when this project is going to end. 170 countries. Technically, there are like 190 some, depending how you count it, independent states in the world. I don't need to read and try to track down and read something from every Polynesian island, right? I'm going to do one book for all of Polynesia, one book for all of Micronesia, and there's several small European states, like I think Andorra is an example that I'm probably going to skip over, but I found a nice round number, 170 countries that I'm going to do. So 85 would be the halfway point. We are approaching that very quickly. At 85 countries, I am looking to possibly take something of a break, but not because I'm not going to be reading or continuing this channel. I really want to take a pause to work on sort of a project, an essay that I've been struggling with in my head for a long time, and this is kind of something I really feel is important to do, to stop halfway, kind of at this pinnacle, and take stock of what I've learned and synthesize a lot of the reading that I've done around the themes that I feel are the most important, that to the world and to myself right now. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And also the next few books are going to be, I would say like the next 10 to 15 books are kind of all going to be in sort of non-fiction genre. Let's say 10 books. Like this is kind of non-fiction, right? And so I'm going to do a bit of like non-fiction phase, but then we're going to come back to fiction on the back end of this project. So it's just going to be the next 10 books or so that are all thematically going to be leaning a bit toward nonfiction, just because these are all going to be countries where the best and most interesting book that I felt to read that I could find from them is a nonfiction book rather than a fiction book. And so I'm just kind of grouping all of them together. But the next video is actually going to be talking about Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. So it'll be after that one. I guess we can't really call that nonfiction, but certainly had many impacts in history, yeah, it's not too original, but I thought I would give my thoughts on these great classics. I'm not looking to qualify them like, are they good or bad? That they're way above me to do that, but just sort of my experience reading them, which translations I used, and kind of what they made me think about, and so on. So that's all. Take care, and thanks for tuning in as usual.